That was an intentionally clickbaity title. I apologize, but I wanted to get your attention to tell you immediately that there is truly no best race that makes you better at any one class than any of the other ones. This should save you time on this video or any of the other ones in the future. And today I'm going to go over or tell you how certain races can get a leg up compared to the other races when it comes to particular classes. But since there are no restrictions on your ability scores at the beginning of the game, it just comes down to racial passives, which are mainly nice to haves more than anything else. If this is your first time on my channel, the way I do things here is by upfronting the knowledge of my videos to see if it's the right one for you. So with that being said, 3 of the top performing races right now are Forest Gnomes for their innate speak to animals cantrip, as talking to animals is very strong in any Larian game. The Wood subrace of either full or half-elves for increased movement speed. You get 5 more meters or however many feet that is. And then lastly, the half-orc for just disgustingly strong critical hits. Outside of that, everything is just kind of purely up to you. If you truly want to min-max, you can pick one of those 3, but this is a role-playing game, and it's such a juicy single-player narrative, so I can't encourage you enough to please play the race that you want, and not the one that the internet tells you that you should. We live our lives with enough constraints on them, so let your escapism be exactly how you want it to be. You spent your money on it after all. But that's really it. That's the TLDR of this video. If that's all you wanted to know, please feel free to shut the video down and get back to enjoying your time in Baldur's Gate 3. Before you head out, please don't forget to like, comment, and or subscribe. Each one of those things does truly help me out in a very, very huge way, and I greatly appreciate it. You can quickly navigate to any part of this video that interests you the most using the chapters above the timeline in the description. And if you need help with any of the D&D terms that are brought up in this video, I have a full breakdown of the terms linked in the upper right-hand corner. Lastly, don't forget to follow me on Twitch, where I will be doing giveaways and streaming Baldur's Gate 3 the next few days. Let's get started here on the best races for each class in Baldur's Gate 3. So just loading into the game here, I'm going to quickly take a look at the ability scores just to talk about this. I'm going to just clear this all off and put it like this. So without assigning your +2 and your +1 bonus, everyone starts just like this. So for the most part, regardless of your race, your ability score won't matter. And if you're not familiar with this and you've not played any of the D&D games in the more recent days, I believe it's like Tasha's Cauldron or whatever the hell, they changed it all to being like this. So you assign a +2 and a +1. It's no longer bound by a specific race where, hey, you know what? An elf can never be truly as strong as a half-orc because of their racial bonuses. Now your racial bonuses are right here in the race features section, or if you're playing like a half-elf, you go into the sub-race and you go and select those, and you're going to get a specific sub-race bonus as well as your additional race features. So I just want to quickly go over this here before we break into each and every individual subgroup I've set up for this video, but that's just kind of some general information up front. So rather than me breaking this apart into individual classes or individual groups of classes, I've decided to break this up by race. And I think this is probably the easiest way to talk about a set of benefits that one race can apply to types of classes, rather than saying, hey, if you're playing a barbarian, you should just choose a half-orc, which, I mean, that might not be a bad idea anyway. But taking a look at the elves, we get some race features to take a look at, and we're going to talk about all those real quick. So basal race speed is 30 feet. So you always will have a base racial speed of 30 feet unless you are a small race like a dwarf, halfling, gnome. They all have 25 feet per turn. Now the elves then also get dark vision, and they get elven weapon mastery, or weapon training, I'm sorry, which is going to give them longsword, shortbow, and longbow, which would otherwise be broken apart by simple and martial weapon proficiencies respectively. Now Fey ancestry will give us an advantage on saving throws against being charmed, and they cannot be put to sleep. So magic can't put them to sleep, but that also means narratively they cannot be put to sleep. You might be encountering things that say, hey, you know, do this, drink this potion, it puts you to sleep, but your Fey ancestry makes you immune to such things. Now into the sub-races, we have both High Elf and Wood Elf, because Drow are on their own. And the Wood Elf one I'll just talk about first gives you 5 more feet. That's actually very strong. So you're the fastest moving thing in the game for the most part, right? You move 35 feet base as a Wood Elf, which is actually quite strong if you're playing any kind of melee class. But this is also great if you're playing a stealth-based class like a Rogue or even like a Gloomstalker for the Ranger, and you're just trying to get it in and out of combat with sneak or whatever it is. You have that increased movement speed, which is nice. But this is also reflected into like a ranged or a casting class that allows you to get some distance from something, maybe move on to an upper ledge so that you can get advantage from height, or at least the increased damage from being on a height, or the height advantage, whatever it's called. Plenty of things that can be given from Fleet of Foot. Now, with the High Elf, you get access to cantrips. Now, if you don't know what a cantrip is, it is a level 0 spell, meaning you can cast it any number of times in a day. Like, you don't have to do a long rest to recycle them. You can cast a firebolt every turn if you want. It just simply takes an action. And then you have access to quite a few cantrips here. And these cantrips are pretty good. But if you're a fighter, you're like, well, I don't need spells. I mean, this is based off my intelligence. That's not going to help me. Well, having low intelligence doesn't hurt you. So this is a -1 to intelligence checks. So this isn't going to do less damage because of that. And on top of it, we also get stuff like True Strike, where if I am a melee character, I'm now going to gain advantage on my attack rolls. So playing a High Elf doesn't mean that, okay, well, I'm just going to be better at casting spells. Sure, you get a cantrip, but it also makes you a better combatant because of stuff like True Strike, or maybe even Blade Ward here, which helps you take half damage from bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing attacks, things that you're going to deal with when you are playing a melee class. And since we're talking about the elves, let's also talk about the Drow. Now, Drow have the exact same things for the most part when it comes to being an elf with a Fey ancestry that the elves do. They get superior dark vision because they live in the Underdark, and they also get Drow weapon training. So they have rapier, short sword, and hand crossbow. Hand crossbow being particularly good because of the crossbow expert and the sharpshooter feats, which are quite strong. And they move their typical 30. Their subrace doesn't give them any difference here. So the Drow, though, doesn't necessarily make them any better at any one thing when it comes to a race selection, right? Getting access to rapier, short swords, and hand crossbows is cool, and then increased dark vision is great. But like I've said here before, this is an example of a race that you're just picking the Drow because you like the Drow. The sub-race thing is a lore thing, and it has nothing to do with their capabilities within the game. It might mean something as far as narratives go, and I don't want to spoil that for you, so you'll have to discover that for yourself. But the Drow would be no different than any other race for the most part, just having access to rapier, short sword, and hand crossbow if you want to use those weapons for, say, your bard, your rogue, your ranger, because these are all dexterity-themed weapons. You'd want to use something dexterity-themed with that, keeping that in mind. You can use your strength. There's nothing that prevents you. Any finesse weapon you can use with either dexterity or strength, whichever one is higher. So when you are looking at those, that's what you want to think about because you get proficiency in them automatically. The Tiefling is a pretty cool race here because they get this hellish resistance. You have resistance to fire damage, taking only half damage from it. And fire damage is very common in the game. So whether you are someone who's going to be running up close and personal and you're running over, say, a barrel that's exploded and now there's fire on the ground, well, you're going to take half damage from that, which is really nice. Or someone uses a fire spell against you, you'll take half damage against it. Or maybe their weapon attack is enchanted with fire, like one of the characters in the very beginning of the game. Well, you're going to take half damage against it. You also have dark vision, which is great, so you can see in the dark. But you've got 3 sub-races, and these sub-races will each grant you one specific cantrip. Now, this is again going to come down really to your decision from a lore perspective. Do you want to be a Zariel Tiefling? Tieflings from Zariel's bloodline are empowered with martial strength and can channel Searing Flame to punish their enemies, or Mephistopheles or Asmodeus, so it's really up to you. The cantrip here, Thaumaturgy, is pretty good for advantage on intimidation and performance checks. So if you are playing a character that is going to be the main character, which you will play because that's how this game works, then this is going to help you out. If you are trying to lean into any kind of intimidation or performance with your maybe a bard, or maybe if you are a fighter or a barbarian, you're choosing intimidation as a proficiency, you have these options to get advantage on them, which is great. Now, this is a cantrip, so it's an action. So when you go to do the roll, you'll cast this. You don't have to always be casting it. Oh man, I didn't know I was going to do that check before I got into that conversation. When it comes up in the conversation for the roll, you can go ahead and do that. Use Thaumaturgy, the cantrip. And remember, since it's a cantrip, you can just keep using it. You don't ever have to rest to do it again. Mephistopheles has Mage Hand, which is pretty nice because it's a hand that'll go and interact with objects for you. Pick locks, open levers, get a backpack that you maybe can't reach out of your way. It has a good 60-foot radius too, or distance too. So it's got a really long radius. So you can actually use this to manipulate things or get things that you maybe otherwise cannot reach. Asmodeus cantrip, I don't like this one as much. It's Produce Flame. A flame in your hand that sheds light in a 30-foot radius and deals 1d4 fire damage when thrown. Throwing the flame immediately after you conjure it does not cost an action. So it's like a free 1d8 fire damage, more or less. And it is a light source, which is cool and all, but I think I'd much rather have the utility of the other two. If I'm speaking purely about the cantrips here. But you should definitely be choosing your subrace of Tiefling based off of these things, based off of the lore, really, of these locations, because maybe you want to be more of a Zariel Tiefling, because maybe you're going with more of a fighter character. None of these subraces are going to be better at casting than any other one, or better at being a rogue, or any of the skulkier races, or a cleric or a druid than any of the other ones. Human is very bare bones, seeming. They can move their typical 30 feet. They get civil militia, which gives them weapon proficiency in spears, pikes, halberds, and glaives, which actually are quite good weapons. Spear is versatile, so it can be used with one-handed or two-handed, but pikes, halberds, and glaives gives you extra reach. They're really, really nice weapons, and they can do a lot of damage. And you can stack them with some really fun feats. But armor proficiency with light and shields, which is lovely. You can just kind of get this out the gate. So if you want to be maybe a sorcerer or a wizard that does not start with light armor, this will give you access to that and allow you to cast spells, because that's what armor proficiency does. It allows you to cast spells if you have that proficiency. So this is very nice. You can kind of lean a little bit heavier into an armor range that you maybe were not able to access. Or maybe if you selected a druid or a cleric and you wanted access to pikes, halberds, or glaives, you can now get that through the civil militia perk here. But you also get human versatility, so this is very nice. So you select an additional skill to be proficient in, and your carrying capacity is increased by 1/4. The carrying capacity thing is pretty negligible, since you've got 3 other characters. You could just spread your carrying capacity across easily. But this means when we go to this location, we get right here, skill with proficiency, another one, because we are, this is like the symbol for race. So it's because we're a human, we can go, okay, you can see right here, if I go athletics, I can choose to do my racial one here, or use my innate 2. 2 is your standard skill proficiency that you'll get for a class. Certain classes will have more, like I think it's a rogue has 3. And like a bard, I think may also have 3. Then the actual one we get here is because of our human heritage. So this is not necessarily good for any one class, but I will say a class that is focused on a lot of skill proficiency, being human, allows them to even more focus on more skill proficiencies. So let's get an example here, right? Let's go ahead and go to this. So now I get 4 skill proficiencies because I'm a bard. And if I kind of look at this with my background and how I can manipulate this with my background, I technically get 6 in total, right? Because background is going to grant me 2 skill proficiencies of whichever background I choose. And then I've got my 3 skill proficiencies as a bard, and then my 1 skill proficiency as a human. So if you're trying to play a class that leans very heavily into skill proficiency, and bard and rogue would be 2 very good examples, you can really pull a lot out of this by going human and getting even more bang for your buck. Since we talked about elves and of humans, let's talk about half-elves. Now, half-elves take the kind of best of both worlds when it comes to humans and elves. They get the civil militia training, so they get access to spear, pikes, halberds, and glaives, as well as a light and shield armor proficiency. They get dark vision, and they get Fey ancestry. So there's a lot of really cool things going here. Now, depending upon which subrace I choose, I go high half-elf and get access to my cantrip here, whatever cantrip I want to get access to, I grab it in this location. And this is nice, right? Like you can go high half-elf, get some of the benefits you want from going half-elf in general, right, with the civil militia, and then swap this on over. Now, narratively too, I think that, personally, if I were to say, hey, there's one race that I think is the best, it's half-elf. I just think it's so, they can kind of dodge a lot of things. So for one, elves can't have beards. Half-elves can, because they have human ancestry in them. So if you wanted to play an elf with a beard, just choose a half-elf. You can typically get a pass on a lot of things. Like, oh, you're a half-drow, so I only half hate you. Drows in general suffer from a lot of racism in this game. And being a half-elf, you kind of like, oh, right, well, you know what? Maybe you're not half, maybe you're half bad, you know? So this is kind of an interesting way to kind of skirt the lines of being one or the other to get maybe the best of both worlds. But there are also situations where you'll encounter things in the game where they go, oh, you're goddamn half-elf. So pick what I said with a grain of salt, because I think too the wood half-elf is really strong. You get the high half-elf cantrip, you get the drow half-elf dancing lights, which is, okay. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, my bard is a drow half-elf because I love drow half-elves. Not because they're good, but because I really like drow in general, and I like the lore of a half-elf. So Wood Half-Elf, though, is really good because they get the 5 movement speed and then all the other benefits here of dark vision, civil militia, and of being a half-elf and kind of sitting in that interesting racial line between the two, where a lot of points in the game where you would be biased for one or the other, you can kind of get a skirt by. And that's another thing to kind of consider with races that not a lot of people talk about, is that there's a lot of narrative nuance to your race selection. It's one of the only things that cannot be swapped out outside of your origin when you respec, because so many decisions in the game are based off of what your race is, and everything prior to when you want to respec can't be undone because you swapped your race. So that's why race is always going to be locked in for you. Switching over to the Half-Orc, this is one of the races that is newly added with the launch of the game, right? The Dragonborn and the Half-Orc. And the Half-Orc is spicy because you get relentless endurance. If you reach 0 hit points, you regain 1 hit point instead of becoming downed. And when you land a critical hit with a melee attack, your damage dice are tripled instead of doubled. That is so good. And then dark vision, as well as your base racial. So I'm not going to lie to you, I think of all the races, the Half-Orc is the race that is a fighter. Because if I were to choose a wizard or a warlock, a wizard or a sorcerer, and never go into actual melee, even a cleric or a druid and never really go into melee, I'm wasting one of the things that makes Half-Orcs so strong, is that they triple their melee critical damage. So any melee class just thrives as a Half-Orc. Keep in mind though, all classes thrive with the ability to basically get a single get out of jail free card here, right? If you reach 0 hit points, you regain 1 hit point instead of being downed. And this is every long rest, I believe. It doesn't say here, but I believe it's every long rest. And that's a really strong capability. So it kind of allows you to, you could be sitting at 1 hit point, and then something comes up to you and does 58 damage. Let's just say 58. It doesn't matter. It brings you to 0 and then you come right back to 1 because of relentless endurance. So it's a really nice way to take an splash of damage. Like if you're saying you're in a fight and you're like, man, you know what? I got 2 characters right now. Both are really weak. I'll throw my Half-Orc in front because he can't die this round. No matter what, he will stay the next round and I can heal him or do something to try and counteract the damage that's done, versus that thing hits my other character that doesn't have relentless endurance and they just get KO'd. So this is a nice way to kind of skirt that line. And again, it's why the Half-Orc really thrives being up close and personal. But of course, too, like I said, if you're playing a caster character, this is still a great way to say, oh, you know what? I don't have many hit points. I was able to get back online very quickly because relentless endurance kept me alive in order to heal myself or do whatever. Githyanki are pretty interesting. I think they're like corrupted elves from what I understand lore-wise. They have this martial prodigy in that they get armor proficiency with light and medium armor, which is really nice, right? So you can be playing as a warlock and get medium armor right out the gate. Then they also get proficiency in all swords, short, long, and great swords, which is, again, really sick. Playing a warlock, I can now pop into each one of those if I don't want to go pack to the blade, which would otherwise give me a proficiency in that weapon. But I think too, it's really fun to just be able to get access to any of these weapons that you might not get access to if you're maybe playing a druid or a cleric that doesn't get that unless they go down certain circles or domains. So it's nice to kind of see that ability kind of turn on for you. So it's a cool way to get access to those proficiencies and pull those proficiencies into classes that don't have it. Again, sorcerer or wizard getting access to your light and medium armor, which you otherwise would not get. Cantrip 2, you get Mage Hand 2. Very nice. We talked about it just a little bit ago, but it's the ability to more or less manipulate things at a 60-foot range, so you can trigger any levers, you can pull things for you that you can then use. There's another instance in which you can trip up things so that you don't actually have to go and do the trap yourself, whatever it is. You can disarm, you can pick locks. Mage Hand is super useful in this game, especially a game that is really about manipulating and using an environment in so many different ways. So Mage Hand, do not sleep on it. You'll get it if you're an arcane trickster. You'll get it for this character. You'll get it for the Tieflings. It's a very good ability. But then they also get Astral Knowledge. So it used to be if you played early access, you just got access to a special skill proficiency. So what this does, let me explain it for you if you're maybe new to D&D. Gain proficiency in all skills of a chosen ability. Let's go ahead and go to abilities here. Let's take a look at change, and we'll go unclick that. So these are organized in order: strength, dex, con, intelligence, wisdom, charisma, as that type of skill. So athletics, acrobatics, all the way down. It just follows that same exact trajectory here. So all of my dexterity ones are right in line here. And then it goes into intelligence. Then it's going to go into wisdom. And then it'll go into charisma. So if I choose, hey, you know what? I want to use my astral knowledge here. Oops, my astral knowledge. And I want to choose proficiency in charisma. I gain proficiency. I gain 2 proficiency. You gain your proficiency bonus, which starts off at 2 and becomes 3 and 4 later on. You gain that 2 in all charisma skills, which would be deception, intimidation, performance, and persuasion. And you get it until you do a long rest. It's sick, and it doesn't require concentration either. You just have it. It's like a ritual. It's just like if you did speak with animals. It's a very powerful capability. Now, that doesn't make them any better than any one class, but it does make them very strong if they are your player class, where you're saying maybe you're going with a sorcerer or a warlock or a bard, and you have a ton of charisma, and then you choose charisma proficiencies. Then you just get way more bonuses to all those if you don't already have a skill proficiency in them. Or maybe you're playing a fighter or a barbarian and you have got no skill proficiencies in any charisma skill. Boom, you turn this on and you're good. Maybe you're not playing, or maybe you're playing a wizard or you're playing a cleric or a druid and you don't have sleight of hand and no one in your entire party has sleight of hand. Use astral knowledge on dexterity skills and get a proficiency in those skills to pick locks, disarm traps, and allow you to get through portions of the game you otherwise would kind of get hung up on. Time for the small races. You now have the dwarf. So the dwarf has some cool race features. We get dwarven combat training, which is battle axes, hand axes, light hammers, and war hammers. Dark vision, and then dwarven resilience. You have advantage on saving throws against poison, and you have resistance to poison damage. You will encounter quite a bit of poison in this game, especially in the early portions. So this dwarf racial feature, as just regardless of your subrace, is actually quite good. But then we have our 3 subraces. So the gold dwarf, your hit point max increases by 1 and increases by 1 again every time you gain a level. So gold dwarfs actually make amazing paladins and fighters, characters that are kind of upfront and personal and taking more damage. But it also makes them very good sorcerers and wizards because it allows them to have a higher health pool to pull from so they don't get killed as quickly. So you can always kind of look at something like this. Don't think of the subtext as, oh, this means I have to play a tank character. No, this just means that you're better at staying alive as any character you choose. The shield dwarf here gets armor proficiency in light and medium armor. This also matches with all the hammers and axes that you get from the dwarven combat training. So shield dwarf, if you're playing a fighter or a paladin, you already have up to heavy armor proficiency. If you're playing as a ranger, you already have medium. But if you're playing as a rogue, you don't. So you do this, and now you're a rogue with medium armor proficiency, but keep in mind that might also limit your ability to sneak. Just keep those things in mind when you look at these armor proficiencies. Don't go, oh, I can get heavy armor on my character somehow and I'll be a rogue. That might make it hard to sneak because it's metal armor. So you can look at these armor proficiencies get granted by these subrace features as a way to crack into an armor range that might help you out more than you thought it would, or something that you didn't think you'd ever get access to. Sorcerers and wizards being examples, not getting light and medium. Then the Durgar here are your Underdark dwarfs, and they're probably my favorite ones. Everything in the Underdark is cool to me for some dumb reason, because I'm edgy. But the resilience here, you have an advantage on saving throws against illusions and being charmed and paralyzed. And honestly, charmed and paralyzed is one of those things that you'll encounter quite a bit in this game in general, but it's also very nice to have an advantage against saving against, because losing control of your character in any way, shape, or form is always very damning in any Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons games aren't so much about healing through damage, they're about using full control of your character across both your actions, action and bonus action, to maximize your damage output to kill the engagement as fast as you can. Healing is a nice to have, but losing control of your character is just a damning thing to have all the way around. So having that is quite nice. You also get superior dark vision here as well. So going down with a dwarf, you can choose any gamut of classes here, but getting more survivability as a gold dwarf, shield dwarf giving you more armor, and Durgar giving you some better resilience makes you helps you choose. Maybe you want to use this character because you're going to be up close and personal, and you're not going to have innate charm resistance, which would come from having wisdom. Wisdom and intelligence are typically the stats associated with making a save against charm. So if you're playing a fighter, or you're playing a paladin, who will probably have good wisdom, to be honest, or maybe you're playing a barbarian, you might not have high int and wisdom. These will allow you to save against it. Next up is the gnomes, the little bros. Now these guys have gnome cunning. You have advantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws, which is actually all very strong, because all three of those abilities are typically associated with ability scores or anything that would some way give you a crowd control effect or a persistent like debuff of some sort. Any kind of like general like like a Bane I think is like a wisdom one, or Charm is a wisdom or an intelligence, Tasha's Hideous Laughter. All these things they fall into intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. So having an advantage rolling against it, remember advantage means you roll 2 die, you pick the better of the 2, is a nice way to dodge those things if, again, you do not have corresponding high ability scores in each one of these abilities. Having a high ability score kind of negates it, but now you have advantage, so it makes it even better. Sub-races, though, we have the Rock Gnome. They also have deep vision or dark vision, but this helps out with add twice your proficiency bonus to history checks, which there are a good amount in the game. I think I have encountered more investigation, arcana, and perception checks organically than I have history. So this, I think, I'm not going to say there's a bad race, because there's not. I've said in the beginning of the video, I've said about this whole video many times, all races apply to however you want to play. Enjoy it. As far as a sub-race feature I don't find particularly useful, this falls into it, just like the Drow one does. But like I've said, Drow's like my favorite elf, so I still chose it. So just keep that in mind. Forest Gnome. Like I've said, beginning, Forest Gnome is one of the strongest in my opinion because you get access to speak with animals just out the gate. And that might seem really stupid. Oh, why do I care about that? Larian games have a stupid amount of interaction with animals to circumvent portions of the game, get access to things that you would not otherwise get access to, get followers you would not otherwise get access to, and get information you otherwise would not get access to. And there are tons of things in the first 10 minutes of getting out the Illithid ship, you're going to speak to an animal. Guaranteed. You will encounter it because you'll have to get one character and you'll have to talk to an animal. And then you can talk to animals throughout a lot of Act 1, which are really going to help you out with a lot of things. Owlbears, bears, all sorts of stuff. It will continue to return for you throughout the entirety of the game. And again, it's a ritual, so you use it and it stays on you until you long rest. And then you just use it again. Because it's a cantrip too. I think she actually says it's a spell, but still. I'm pretty sure this counts as a cantrip. All said and done. It says spell right there, but I don't see it. Either way, you just use it because the fighter doesn't have any spell slots. I would think of it as a cantrip nonetheless. You use it and you get access to it. It's great. Deep Gnome, though, gets you stone camouflage. You take advantage on stealth checks. So this would be an example of one in which I'm particularly going to take a lot of advantage of if I'm playing a ranger, a bard, or a rogue. Ones that would typically have stealth checks on. Now, you can play stealthy fighter characters or multi-class into anything on this list, of course, and take advantage of some of these racial sub-features, but definitely having any kind of stealth check and getting advantage on it is a huge bonus with stone camouflage. Because I believe in the 5th edition, stone camouflage worked with, you had to be on stone terrain. You don't here. You just simply have to go ahead and do a stealth check and you get an advantage to the roll. So it makes it particularly good if you want to sneak around as a gnome. Next up is the Dragonborn. And the Dragonborn are a badass looking race. They're one of my favorite looking races setting. Like, look at these guys. Their eyes are so sick. But I will say that they don't really have a ton of crazy racial features. This doesn't make them bad for any one class. It actually makes them totally fine for any one class because they're just nicely applicable to all of them. Because they get an action, which is a breath attack, followed by a subclass or a sub-race feature, which is a resistance to that same element. So most of them will share 2 of the same element, with I think 3 of them having lightning and 3 of them having fire, I believe it is. Because gold, red, and brass all have fire elements. Bronze, copper, I don't know, it was bronze, black. I guess it's just bronze and black. Yeah. It was blue and bronze are lightning, copper and black are acid, and white and silver are frost, with green giving you access to poison. And like I said, you just kind of choose whichever one makes the most sense for you. None of these are going to be any one better than any other class. I will say that there are effects in the game that will be more prevalent. Like I've said before, fire and poison are pretty prevalent. But there's also effects in the game that you get from armor that will boost certain things. Like I have one, I think it's a pair of gloves or a pair of boots that will actually, if you do poison damage, it increases the amount of poison damage you do. So that'd be pretty good for a green Dragonborn. Whereas otherwise I would have said this is only going to be good on a class that can actually cast that specific type of damage. So there are definitely instances where this can work. Another example would be a pair of gloves that say when you do unarmed, or electric damage, you do additional bits of damage here and there with certain other things, making blue and bronze particularly good for those types of gloves. So this is the kind of interesting thing about Dragonborn is they're not particularly amazing at any other class than other ones, but they have certain things in the game that give them access to stuff that other classes wouldn't have as a virtue of that class not doing that thing. What I mean by that is those gloves, they increase your poison damage. Well, you know what? I'm a fighter and I don't innately do poison damage. Now I can with poison breath. So that would be an example of how the Dragonborn can be used for specific classes that don't get certain things. And I saved the dark horse for last, deliberately, because everything that I've said in this video is kind of a lie. The Halfling actually is like the best race. And the reason that the Halfling is the best race is because of this. Lucky. When you roll a 1 for an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, you can re-roll the die and must use the new value. What does that really mean? Okay, for an attack roll, you probably don't see it. But when you're doing an ability check or a saving throw, if you're trying to maybe do a specific dialogue or narrative thing, where you have to do a saving throw because you're reading from a necromantic book, or maybe you have to do an ability check so that you can do an intimidation roll, or whatever it is to get past a certain thing, well, if you roll a 2, you get to pull from all of your bonuses, guidance or your proficiencies, all those things. If you roll a 1, it's a critical miss, it's a critical failure. You don't get to pull any bonuses into it. So if something has a difficulty of 3 and you roll a 2, you can bonus past it. If something has a difficulty of 3 and you roll a 1, you can't bonus past it. So getting a free reroll that you don't have to use your inspiration, and inspiration are linked to your background. You'll do certain things. It'll say, hey, here's an inspiration point. You can use this to reroll ability checks and what have you. But getting that as just a default thing you don't ever have to use, that is really strong. And this counts for stuff like opening locks, disarming traps, pretty much everything in the damn game. It's a really, really good one. And this doesn't have a recycle. You just use it. You just have to take the new roll. That's it. So if you have multiple things back to back, you're just constantly re-rolling. So yeah, truly this is the best race from a die rolling perspective. Brave, you have advantage on saving throws against being frightened, which will be decently common. You also get Lightfoot Halflings that have an advantage on stealth checks, so if you want to stealth around, and also get advantage to re-roll anytime you're trying to pop a lock or a disarm or anything like that. This is right there for you. And Strongheart Halflings have advantage on saving throws against poison and resistance to poison's damage, which you'll get in spades. So I think probably like I said, it's the dark horse. I think it's the one that people are probably going to play the least because it's a Halfling. I don't find Halflings terribly interesting, but they had one of the strongest abilities in 5th edition, and it reigns true here in Baldur's Gate. I think if this had a long rest that you had to wait in between it, it'd kind of curb how good it is, but it truly is the best damn ability because it defies what class you're playing. All classes benefit from being able to get an auto-free reroll from a 1. Like, that is so damn good. So if you really want the best race, I'm sad to say it's truly a Halfling. But hopefully this kind of helps you out in choosing your race as you jump into Baldur's Gate for the first time. Because as I've said, it's one of the only permanent choices you can make in the game outside of your origin. But truly choose whatever you want to play. Choose the one that's going to resonate with you or the kind of character you're going to make. You know, do you want to be a heroic dwarf paladin? Do you want to be a skulking tiefling rogue? Do you want to be a half-orc wizard? Then just do it. Don't let anything that you read or digest about how to make your character discourage you from playing the character you want to play. Like I said before, we deal with enough restrictions in our life. Play your escapism how you want. You spend your money on it. You do your day-to-day. I don't care if you're 12 years old or you're 42 years old. Enjoy this however you want. You deal with enough responsibilities and bullshit in a day. Play the game that you want to play. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.